I have always known I was different. From the day I first stepped into Isabel's world, a world filled with shimmering pledges and unspoken norms, I knew I could never follow the path laid out before me. From the very beginning, as I shook hands with her family, I sensed a coldness in their eyes, a hushed whisper that told me I was not intended to belong. Every word they spoke, every dismissive gaze, made it painfully clear. I was not the man they had pictured for their daughter. I was not affluent enough, not accomplished enough, and most of all, not the man who fit into their grand vision of distinction. Even as I smiled and nodded in polite agreement, a profound ache settled inside me. But I loved Isabel, with everything I had. So I endured, every barb, every slight. I took it all, hoping that love might one day prove stronger than their hatred. I remember the day when Sophia, Isabel's sister, announced her engagement to Ryan Stanford, a name that echoed strength and accomplishment in every conversation. As she spoke of grand celebrations and a future filled with luxury, I felt a sinking sensation, knowing that my place in such occasions would never be more than a token presence. I was the quiet, invisible man in the background, a shadow, drifting through the tunnels of laughter and extravagant discourse. At family gatherings, I sat at the dinner table, searching, desperately, for a warm smile, a kind word, something, anything, that would make me feel like I belonged. Yet all I received were sidelong glances, murmured comments, words left unsaid but understood all the same. I was not enough. I strained to understand why. My heart, so full of love for Isabel, could not bridge the widening rift between me and her family. Their world revolved around wealth, status, and legacy. And I was an outsider, a trespasser in their carefully curated world of prestige. I spent countless hours trying to prove myself, helping with the smallest tasks, inserting myself into discussions, only to be met with empty reassurances and silence. Felt like a performer on a stage where the role had already been cast for someone else, a role I could never truly embrace. And then came the wedding plans, a spectacle of grandeur beyond my imagination. From the luxurious ballroom to the meticulously chosen floral arrangements, every detail was orchestrated by Eleanor, Isabel's mother, with a flawless precision that left no space for my input. I was not needed. I was not wanted. I was irrelevant. At one particular dinner, after yet another night of whispered judgments and veiled insults, Eleanor turned to me. Her smile was sweet, too sweet, but her words, they cut deep. "Oh, and we'll need an extra donation from you for the reception," she said, her tone casual, yet laced with an unspoken demand. I turned to Isabel, hoping, begging for her to speak up to defend me. But she didn't. Instead, she remained silent, eating, pretending as if nothing had happened. Something inside me broke. With trembling fingers, I pulled out my wallet. I retrieved my card, the one I had fought so hard to acquire, and placed it on the table. "Take whatever you need," I murmured, and then, the words that sealed my fate. "Good. At least you're useful for something." Eleanor's voice dripped with superiority, the same tone I had grown all too accustomed to. The laughter continued. The conversation flowed. But in that moment, I was drowning. It was no longer about love, no longer about family. I was merely a bank account, a means to an end. And then came the reception. I had spent days preparing, hoping that maybe, just maybe, this time I would be seen. I stepped out of my hotel room that morning in a perfectly tailored navy suit. My shoes shined. My tie was immaculate. I even practiced a smile in the mirror, one that I hoped would hide the turmoil raging inside me. As Isabel and I entered the wedding hall, the air was thick with celebration and quiet disdain. I approached the seating table where exquisite name tags had been carefully placed, each denoting a role in this meticulously planned affair. My fingers trembled as I reached for mine, and when I unfolded it, I froze. Housekeeper. For a long moment, I simply stared. Surely this was a mistake? A cruel joke? The laughter around me suddenly felt deafening. Every chuckle, every hushed whisper became a chorus of mockery. Eleanor's voice rang out, smooth yet razor sharp. "You always wanted a place in the family, didn't you? Well, here's one that suits you." I turned to Isabel, my heart hammering in my chest, desperate for her to say something, anything. She looked at the name tag. She bit her lip, and she laughed, a small, nervous giggle. "It's just a joke," she whispered, nudging my arm lightly. "Just a joke. Just a joke." I felt the world shift beneath me. The weight of every insult, every rejection, every moment of humiliation crashing down all at once. I was done. I reached up and slowly peeled the name tag from my suit, my fingers clenching around the crisp paper. No more. No more silent endurance. No more pretending. No more sacrificing my dignity for the approval of those who saw me as nothing more than a tool. That night, as the celebration carried on around me, as they toasted to wealth, power, and legacy, I made a decision. I would no longer fight for a place at their table. I would no longer let them define me, because I was worth more. I deserved more. And as I walked out of that grand, glittering hall, leaving behind the spectacle of a wedding that was never mine to begin with, I felt free. I no longer allowed myself to be defined by the harshness of others. The darkness crept about me like a peaceful veil, each cold breath promising that I may find a way to rebuild my life away from the poisoned echoes of a failing union. As I turned to leave, the streetlights glimmered on the damp pavement, pointing me toward an uncertain future where I could recover my dignity. With every step, I felt the bonds of humiliation and neglect fall away, replaced by a slow, smoldering hope that I could one day find respect and love on my own terms. The frigid air whispered promises of new beginnings, and in that bittersweet moment of solitude, I resolved to push forward, leaving behind the ghosts of a painful past and entering into a night that, despite its chill, carried the faint shimmer of potential. I walked away from the sight of that catastrophic reception, my heart thumping in my ears as I tried to make sense of the agony I had just undergone. Amid the stillness of the night, with only the faint glow of streetlights to keep me company, I began to understand clearly the terrible truth I had long attempted to avoid. Every disparaging comment, every disdainful gesture, and every patronizing smile from Isabel's family had been building up to this moment of raw, unmistakable clarity. I had allowed myself to be treated as an accessory in a world that prized wealth and prestige above genuine devotion. Now, as I sat alone on a cold, worn bench, the recollections of warmer days with Isabel merged with the bitter taste of betrayal, and I could no longer pretend that I belonged in a life controlled by others' ideals. I remembered the early days of our courtship when aspirations were simple and love was enough to brighten even the darkest regions of our future. Back then, every laugh, every shared secret, and every sweet moment had promised a life founded on mutual respect and understanding. But as the years passed and the influence of her family grew, those dreams were slowly eroded by a tide of condescension and judgment that left me feeling increasingly like an interloper in my own marriage. The hurt I felt was not only from the insults and the public humiliation of that wedding day, but also the pain of understanding that the person I had once admired seemed to have lost sight of the beliefs we had previously shared. I could still hear the echo of her delicate, timid voice when she tried to dismiss the brutality with a smile, as if it were nothing more than a harmless joke. That moment, however, rang in my ears like a death knell. As I glanced up at a sky spangled with uncaring stars, I understood that my voyage to achieving self-respect must begin with a painful reckoning. I had spent far too long judging my worth by the standards of a family that considered me nothing more than a means to an end. With each passing second on that cold bench, the sharpness of my epiphany grew. I was no longer prepared to allow their narrow conceptions of success and dignity to decide who I was. I made a silent pledge to myself that night. I would no longer seek approval from people who provided only disdain and mockery. Instead, I would find a way to rebuild my life on my own terms, to rediscover the person I had been before I was forced into the shadows of their expectations. The decision did not come without trepidation. The way ahead was uncertain, and the prospect of beginning afresh struck me with both a calm fear and a spark of hope. I knew that healing would be a lengthy, difficult journey, riddled with doubts and disappointments. Nevertheless, even as my heart ached from the scars inflicted by years of neglect, a small flame of determination began to glow within me. I recalled the moment at the reception when I had pulled off my wedding ring, a simple gesture that had represented the end of a life immersed in humiliation. That ring, once a sign of eternal promises, had become a weight that bound me to a past I no longer cared to suffer. Now, in the silence of that transformational night, I felt the stirring of something new, a blossoming commitment to honor myself and regain my identity. I knew that the road to self-respect would require overcoming not only the bitterness of external rejection, but also the inner demons that had convinced me I was worthless. Every angry comment, every contemptuous gesture, had been a lesson in how far I had wandered from the truth of who I truly was. As the night deepened, I vowed to press forward, step by painful step, with the dream that one day I would discover a life where my worth was acknowledged without the taint of arrogance or cruelty. At that quiet, soul-searching moment, I embraced a reality that had long been concealed beneath layers of sorrow. I deserved a life filled with respect, love, and dignity.